Welcome to the International Faculty and Scholars series at Arizona State University, where we share the stories and experiences of international scholars from around the world. I'm your host, Giuliano Roberts, International Scholar Program Coordinator here at ISSE. And today we're joined by Dr. Asmita Saha, Clinical Assistant Professor at the School of Counseling and Counseling Psychology at ASU. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
It's our pleasure. So to start, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and about your journey from India to ASU?
Yeah, of course. My journey started off in high school where psychology was an optional subject which I took, which was when my curiosity and interest peaked in psychology. And I wanted to pursue it further, so I did my undergrad in psychology from India. And then for my master's, I came to the US to pursue my master's in clinical psychology. That was in 2018, so quite a few years back. And during that time, I fell in love with the subject even more, and then decided to stay on for a PhD, which I did at Auburn University. And so part of the PhD program is that you also have to do a clinical internship at the end of it, which I did at UT Austin's counseling center. So during this whole time, I've been at different places and sites, like just working with just a bunch of students, different settings like community mental health, private practices, and got to learn a lot more than what I was exposed to back home. And then the role of like this professorship position came up, and I decided to take it up. And feels like a full circle moment now.
That is so great. It sounds like you had a lot of experiences, and it was like definitely like a big journey for you. So how would all those experiences that you had, how did they impact your work with international communities?
Yeah, so in those spaces, I worked with all sorts of students, but then I also advocated to work with international students in most of these spaces because I knew that my own personal experiences were shaping how I see personal and professional kind of combined together. And I also felt like my personal experiences were shaping how I view these students and their presenting concerns. Because being an international student myself, I was able to see the distress when it was coming up in different forms and fashion. And then I was also able to like look at what treatment modalities, for example, would be something that I could help them with and support them with.
And to go back to your journey, can you tell us a little bit more about that and also about your dissertation?
Yeah.
And how did, particularly the idea of going from disconnection to connection.
Yeah.
What inspired you to pursue this kind of work?
Yeah, I think in research we call this like me search, where you're like searching for your own identity and self. And that is what sparked my interest in studying like how we all face disconnection in an isolated environment. And we all want to move towards connection, right? We all want to move towards a sense of belongingness and connection. So how do we do that? And in having that thought, I wanted to study it for international students specifically. So my research really looked into what are the sources of disconnection and can like relationships kind of buffer that distress. For example, like relationship with peers, mentors, and then university community. Is that buffering the stress that you face when you come to a new country and then the stress that you experience when you are in the US, for example? So I think my main findings, if I had to like sum it up, was that quality of connections was coming out to be far more superior than quantity of connections. And there were a couple of like differences. So like international students felt much more safer to talk with their peers and university community, and they felt that distress was reducing. But with mentors, it actually was a little different. So with mentors, they found that when they talked to their mentors about the distress or just problems that they were facing, they experienced more life satisfaction. So the distress wasn't decreasing as such, but they were facing more like well-being, which I think was really interesting because I think students relate to mentors differently because there's like the sense of authority and like power differential present, which you don't really have in peers and like university communities, right? So I thought that was really interesting finding. But overall, I think what my research really went is to really look at the relational focus, and I looked at it from a relational cultural perspective, to really kind of capture what is it that provides a sense of belongingness, what is it that helps them feel supported in a community which is so different from what they're used to.
Yeah, and I think finding that sense of belonging is so crucial.
Yeah.
Especially when you're so away from home.
Yeah.
I mean, I've also been an international student, and it feels like you learn how to be comfortable in the uncomfortable when you leave that comfort zone, right? Which is home.
Yeah, it's hard to like put yourself out there, right? Sometimes I think we ask students to, push yourself out of the comfort zone, things are gonna be fine. But it's so hard to do that in the beginning. Like I remember like coming fresh in 2018, I had this like notion that I should put myself out there, I should participate in these activities which are happening, go out to these programming which the international office is doing. And I was a little scared at first, to be honest. Like I didn't know these people who I was going to interact with. I didn't know how I was going to be perceived. And so it took I would say time to like develop into my own identity, right? Because we have this notion of, in like psychology, like acculturation, where it's this adjustment coming from a different country to a new country, and the adjustment which happens during that time. It's researched so much that there's so much stress which is associated with that transition. So students face that too, like everyone else.
Absolutely. And you mentioned sense of belonging. How crucial is that? How important is that? What helped you feel that sense of belonging for you personally when you came to the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. It helps me like reflect back into, people who really helped me, pushed me through, and also supported me during that journey. And I think for me, it was specific people. I remember being part of this church community, even though I'm not Christian, but I like went along with them to like different events. And they invited me and a bunch of international students to their house to like celebrate Thanksgiving, for example. And I was part of like other groups and communities where they would invite you to their homes to like, just kind of understand their culture. And I think those experiences are so important. They might feel really small in the moment, but those small interactions, like, I don't know, you're finding a home away from home almost. And those experiences like really like stuck with me and how I think about belonging now.
It's about pushing yourself out there.
In a way, like gently.
Gently. It's about like making that first step, which is like probably like the biggest challenge.
It is, yeah. I was like, there were so many students who were like confined in their like social bubble. Like they would, talk with people who they were familiar with, which I totally get. Sometimes it's hard to just get out there and talk to unfamiliar people. But we should definitely make those like transitions to like, how do I go from my own comfort zone to trying something new? Because there's so much unknown out there, which might turn out to be beautiful once you try it out. So,
yeah, and that also makes me reflect a lot about my journey, and I see a lot of things that you shared with my journey too. So, it's definitely not easy. It's a transition, right? It's like a process.
Yeah.
It takes some time, but. You talked about acculturation, and I know that's also like one of the main, one of the main focus, right, in your work.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know about the term, can you just explain what the term means, acculturation and acculturative stress?
For sure. So acculturation, in very simple terms, I think means cultural adjustment, which happens when you move from your country of origin to a new country. So like from country of origin to your host culture. So this transition comes up with a lot of challenges and stressors, and that stressor is termed as acculturative stress. So it's this period of transition and adjustment which students have to navigate, immigrants have to navigate, and overall we call this acculturation.
Okay. And every international student goes through this phase at one point?
I would say that every student has their own way of like navigating this. And acculturative stress can also take different forms. For example, it could mean navigating language differences, like English not being the primary language for most international students. It's hard to like find your own footing with that. Academic English versus written English is so different. Like you could be great at academic and written English, but then with social conversations, you struggle, right? And that shows up as a form of stress. Like navigating social landscape is a huge barrier for most students. It could just be, how do I form meaningful connections, right? It's like it can feel superficial for certain students at one point. So it's a lot of factors, which I think some students might be impacted a lot by it, and then some students have that resiliency to like push through that and not feel that too much.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there's some signs that you can notice, that you can feel that the students experience when it comes to cultural adjustment?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to pinpoint because there's no like explicit signs, but I would say that when students are like emotionally, socially withdrawing from their peers or like classmates, not maybe feeling that they're able to concentrate as much, their appetite, sleep, all those like factors started getting impacted. They feel immense pressure from their family and things like that. I think those are signs which someone from the outside won't be able to just look and say, oh, you are actually facing acculturative stress. These are things which I think when you talk to these individuals, maybe more in depth.
They're almost like hidden
within
their within their person.
I think so. Yeah, it's like hard. It's hard to just. There are no like physical signs. There might be, but there is mostly like psychological in nature.
Okay, interesting. And if you had to go back to your first international journey, what helped you like build those meaningful connections?
I think for me, it has been almost like reminding myself of why I'm here, and then reminding myself that I'm not here to be in my own small bubble. I'm here to explore what's out here, to explore what's new. And that has always pushed me to like try new things, like meeting different people, like just being in a diverse society, especially like a place like US. It's a melting pot of different cultures and identities, and we should be, putting ourselves out there, like getting out of the comfort zone to form authentic connections, because that is possible. It just takes time.
Yes.
And we have to like push through that initial phase of not feeling sure or not feeling like we do belong. And that place comes, at the end of the day, like you do feel belonged in certain spaces. You are able to form your own identity.
I agree. And especially when you are in such a diverse environment, you feel like so exposed, right, to like so many cultures, right? So it's definitely like an enriching experience, right?
Sure.
A lot of times I think about it, and sometimes you can learn so much about that country without even going there physically, right? Without even traveling to that country.
Like you can like go to a friend's house and they're cooking their home cooked meals, for example, and you get to know about their culture. Like I know ISSC holds a lot of festivals from different cultures. Like I was looking that day and you were like, there was Eid happening. So like people coming from different cultures can experience biryani or like food from different cultures. And I feel like, like I can say to my friend, like I actually had biryani and I know exactly what's in that. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really cool.
And it's I also think that food is also like so important, like cultural wise.
For sure.
It definitely helps. It definitely brings people together, right?
Oh yeah, that is definitely one of the cool things I think about ASU, having good resources first, and then being able to organize festivals and events where students don't just like bond. Apart from like conversations, they bond over food, they bond over culture, they bond over like shared experiences. So I think that's the cool thing.
That's great. Since we talked about diverse backgrounds, diverse culture, and being in a place which is so diverse like ASU, how do you approach counseling students that come from a diverse cultural background?
Yeah, so in my current position, I'm not counseling like full time. My full time role consists of teaching and service. But when I was doing counseling with at my internship sites and practicum sites with international students, I would approach students with a lot of cultural humility. And by that, what I really mean is having them talk about their cultural context, right? Like having more context from their upbringing, their own worldview, without having like placing my assumptions on them. So I think that's one thing I've learned working with these students for the past years. Even if someone looks like me, doesn't mean that they share similar experiences. For example, I was working with an Indian student once, and I felt like, okay, like I probably know a lot of the factors that you're coming in with, like the problems, the different concerns. And then she started talking about those, and they didn't really like resonate with me. I was like, this is completely different. And having learned that, you realize like even within the same culture, there are so many minute differences which can exist. So approaching conversations with a lot more openness, cultural humility, and also, I would say, openness to learning about their experiences. I think that's how I would approach like work with them.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think that's very insightful. And I also want to know, how did you feel supported when you were an international student? Like talking about your personal experience.
Yeah, I think for me, it was a mix of different things. I feel I relied a lot on communication with my friends back home in the beginning years, right? Like being in touch with them constantly, either through FaceTime calls or just messages, social media, I think plays a huge role. Also talking to my parents, I think they have been my biggest support system. Even like being far away, talking to them helps me feel better about my day. And especially my father, I think he has always been the kind of person who like tells me to like go for opportunities, like seek opportunities, because you never know like what can lead to what. And like I feel like during my entire life journey, I have like gotten experiences because I wasn't afraid to try out different things. I wasn't afraid to send that one email or like network. And for me, that has felt very supportive, to like not be afraid to like reach out and ask for help. Because that can be, I know, a barrier of like, I don't know when I'm having a problem, and then how can I reach for support, right? Because many international students often have that tendency to like, I'm gonna be strong enough to deal with this on my own. And that's not always possible. You need the social support around you to get through a tough phase.
Yes. Yes. I think that's definitely like a great piece of advice. And thank you for sharing your personal experience and what your dad, your figure, the family. I think it's so important. Like you, I also FaceTime my family a lot with the time zone. So you have to like make sure like you always checking.
Yeah, you're calling at the same time. So it doesn't, they don't sleep.
Exactly. Sometimes you waking up and they're just going to bed, and opposite, right? So you have to find that gap.
The perfect time.
The perfect time in the day. And that could be a challenge too, right? That's something that people also maybe take it for granted. But is it like some kind of advice that you would give to international students and scholars that are navigating like a cultural adjustments and challenges?
I would say like don't hesitate to ask for help and support. You don't need to go to therapy per se if you are feeling that, I guess, have a huge stigma towards receiving counseling services, but you could also have the same connection and support with a friend who understands you, a faculty who trusts you, or like someone who can understand similar concerns to what you are experiencing. It's more about like forming that bond connection. So don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's one thing I would definitely say. And the second one would be get involved with something around you, because it's hard already to come from a different country and a culture to a new, environment. And ASU is a huge campus, right? You want to feel like you belong somewhere. So get connected to a club, organization, find things which are happening around you, things which ISSC is already doing, right? So there's already so much out there. It's almost like, can I pinpoint 2 or 3 things that I can get involved with? And that could serve as like a kind of fuel to like for you to form support systems.
Wow. Thank you for that. And looking back to your younger self, if you had to reflect on it, I want to know, what would you tell to your younger self when you first started this journey? Like, what were you expecting? And did your expectations meet the reality? What kind of thoughts you were going through, like you were navigating before the arrival to the US?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to be adulting so much. I think I came at the age of 20, which is still, I think, a little mature, I would say. But I did not know how much there is growing up to do in terms of, just learning from your experiences. And there's so much independence, I think, which comes with living by yourself or like navigating things in the US, that I learned how to drive for the first time here in the US, which I think was, I don't know, a goal in itself.
Wow. So you were not driving back home before?
I wasn't, because it's so hard to drive in India. So I was like, I might as well learn in the US. So just like the independence part of things, you learn to do so much. Like I didn't know how to cook. I learned how to like cook different meals for myself, like meal prep, drive, navigate finances, things like that, which no one really teaches you until you experience it by yourself. So I would just say, like, be patient with yourself. I think I would say patience, and that would be my key word, is that things would happen at their own pace and time and your own timeline, and that being patient helps you get through those tough times.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes the best way to learn is by experience it on your skin. I think that approach is always like the one gets stuck with you faster.
And even failing at it, right? You might like fail at it a bunch of times, and that's okay. Like no one's like judging you if you fail or if you trip or fall. It's about how you get up, how much resiliency can you show from getting up from those negative experiences, and then apply those experiences moving forward.
You're going through hills and valleys.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you just, at the same time, shaping yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're shaping your identity and you're building your own character.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great.
All takes time.
all at the same time. It takes time, yeah. It's definitely a process. So we are at the end of our podcast, of our episodes. But what message would you share with those who are passionate about supporting international communities?
That feels like a very tough question. I think I would say that try really listening to concerns with an open mind, an open heart, of the fact that these students who are coming in with problems, they just want to be heard, right? They want to be heard to the point where they're able to share their experiences fully, their problems fully with you. So if you are a faculty, mentor, or a peer, or just part of the university community in general, like higher education, international office, these students want to feel like they are heard and seen. So whatever it takes to be able to do that, whether that's outreach programming, whether that's engagement in your classrooms that's inclusive of international students, whether that's listening to your peer who is going through something and then, connecting with them genuinely. There are all different ways that you can do that. But I would say the 2 key things for me is like, can you make space for this person to share their story with you?
Thank you so much, Asmita, for all of your insights and all of your stories and your experiences.
Thank you so much. I loved sharing all of these with you.
It was our pleasure. And this is the end of our episode. So for those who are following us, I want to thank you all for listening and watching this episode. And I'll see you at the next one.